Pro-life push. After months of waiting, the House is set to vote on a proposed ban on late-term abortions. Traveling Pope, we go to Rome for an update on the Holy Father's summer trip to South America. Saluting our veterans, the country marks the 70th anniversary of Nazi Germany's defeat during World War II. And setting a good example, Pope Francis challenges tennis players to serve the Lord on and off the court. Those stories and more on EWTN News Nightly for Friday, May 8th, 2015. Good evening and thank you for joining us. I'm Wyatt Goolsby in for Brian Patrick. Republican leaders are planning a House vote next week on a bill banning late-term abortions. Suzanne LaFranchi has been covering this story. She joins us now with more. Suzanne.
Well, Wyatt, the vote comes after a compromise. GOP leaders dropped a requirement that rape victims would qualify for the procedure only if they already reported the crime to authorities. Top House Republicans abruptly scrapped plans to debate the measure in January after some GOP congresswomen and moderates objected to that reporting requirement. Instead, the new version requires rape victims to have counseling or medical treatment at least 48 hours before an abortion. Republican Congressman Chris Smith, a leading pro-life leader, says this bill would end most abortions in the United States.
Because children can feel pain, they can feel it to a huge degree, at least at 20 weeks. That it is inhumane, it is cruel, it is violence.
The bill would make most abortions after 20 weeks of pregnancy illegal, with few exceptions, although President Obama would likely veto it. Reporter Michael Warren, who broke the story, says the vote is still important.
If the Republicans maintain control of Congress and win the White House, there's a very high likelihood that the United States will be banning abortions after 20 weeks.
Warren says the bill is expected to get wide support, including several votes from House Democrats. Pro-life groups, including National Right to Life and the Susan B. Anthony List, worked with House leaders in crafting the new bill and support it. They believe it is the most significant legislation since the partial birth abortion ban was signed into law by President George W. Bush in 2003. Wyatt?
Suzanne LaFranchi, thanks very much for that report. Now to some of our other stories our EWTN News Nightly team has been covering in today's world. Today marks the 70th anniversary of Nazi Germany's defeat during World War II. Our Jason Calvi joins us tonight from the National Mall, where ceremonies were held to commemorate the end of the war in Europe. Jason?
Wyatt, I'm at the National World War II Memorial. It honors the 16 million Americans who fought in that war. The veterans, now in their 80s and 90s, came to a special ceremony here today and received a hero's welcome.
We're so honored to be here today. Could we have a picture with you?
Robert Zimmerman and the 11th Armored Division captured 2 Nazi concentration camps.
When we went in there, the bodies were stacked up like wood.
Junior ROTC students from Pennsylvania escorted Zimmerman and 11 other World War II vets.
That was an honor. It was an awesome feeling. It was probably the best feeling I've had in a long time.
The feeling was mutual.
It's just an honor to be here to represent the men that didn't make it.
Thank you for your service, ma'am. I appreciate it.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Margaret Jarek was 21 years old when she served in the Navy.
But I woke up this morning and I said, by golly, one way or another, I'm going to get there because I may never get here again.
My father was a World War II veteran, and he just passed away. So it's very emotional for me.
On this 70th anniversary of victory in Europe, Robert Zimmerman honors the 400,000 Americans who didn't make it home.
I still think about all the ones that lost their lives or unable to be here.
As another salute, World War II-era planes soar above Washington, honoring the veterans down here.
The man upstairs hasn't called me home.
When you look around and you see all those graves, and you know you're going to be one of them. You know you're amongst the honored people.
It was an honor for me to be here as well today. I was thinking about my own grandfathers who fought so bravely in that war, defeating the Nazis 70 years ago. Wyatt?
Jason Calvi from the National World War II Memorial. Jason, thanks for that story. Attorney General Loretta Lynch says the Justice Department will conduct a broad investigation of the Baltimore police force. The investigation requested mayor follows riots will determine if Baltimore police practices violate civil rights. British Prime Minister David Cameron's Conservative Party has defied expectations by winning a majority of the seats in Parliament. The election outcomes is a surprise to many who expected a close race between Labour and Conservative parties. Instead, the Prime Minister's party came away with an outright majority. The election has also triggered several major party shakeups. Today, Labour leader Ed Miliband resigned after his party's devastating losses.
I want to do so straight away because the party needs to have an open and honest debate about the right way forward without constraint. Britain needs a Labour Party that can rebuild after this defeat so we can have a government that stands up for working people again. And now it's time for someone else to take forward the leadership of this party.
Leaders from 2 other parties resigned following the results. And immigration reform is expected to be a major issue in our presidential elections in 2016. Earlier this week, Democratic candidate Hillary Clinton made her position clear.
We can't wait any longer for a path to full and equal citizenship. Now, this is where I differ with everybody on the Republican side.
Clinton's remarks during her first campaign stop in Nevada underscored Democrats' efforts to box in Republican presidential candidates on this issue. Join us now is Dan Stein with the Federation for American Immigration Reform, known as FAIR. FAIR is a nonprofit that wants to stop illegal immigration and improve border security. So, Dan, what do you think of Hillary Clinton's comments? Is her position shared by most Democrats?
Well, this represents an effort by the Democratic leadership to polarize the electorate on the question of whether we're going to reward illegal immigrants with citizenship or actually deport them when they break the law. The Clinton administration, the original Bill Clinton one, was actually fairly aggressive in deporting people here who broke our law. But Hillary Clinton is now taking a position that we would view as pretty extreme, because President Obama has said, even though many people think what I did was illegal and unconstitutional, I think it's as far as I can go under the law to give people work documents by the millions who've broken our laws. Hillary Clinton is now saying, no, I'd go a lot farther than that. She's not exactly saying what it is, but what it sounds like is she's saying that if you come here illegally, break our law, she's going to not only give you a job and a work permit and documents like a driver's license, she's going to give you citizenship. Well, clearly no Republican would ever do that, but she's only doing that because she realizes, she thinks Republican candidates aren't going to call the Democrats on this and say, hey, you're supporting amnesty.
Okay, so that's her position. You mentioned President Obama's action on illegal immigration. What are the issues that you see with regards to his executive action?
Well, frankly, we thought he went well beyond what's authorized by law. Congress sets the limits, establishes the rules. The chief executive is supposed to enforce those rules. Congress never delegated to the president the right to give millions of people our jobs with work documents, people here illegally with no right to be in the country. He's saying, no, Congress delegated it. He has this discretion. Now, he may have the discretion to not enforce the law at some level, but he doesn't have the right to give affirmative benefits, our jobs and our public benefits, to people with no right to be in the country. Clearly, Hillary Clinton doesn't agree with that, but in the end, we think not only what Congress has said, which is this is a usurpation, a theft of the Congress's right to decide these issues, it's also an abandonment of his core constitutional responsibility to carry out the laws of the land.
Okay, so let's turn now, like I said, we mentioned Hillary Clinton, we mentioned President Obama. Let's turn to Republican candidates, because this issue is even divisive among them. Jeb Bush supports comprehensive reform, others do not. What do you think, in just your opinion, is the right way to go?
Well, ultimately, of course, immigration has turned into a high politics issue. It's about the battle between the two parties for an emerging constituency, Latino voters. But ultimately, and in the end, the American people are going to have a say. And what you see is that there are Republican candidates like Scott Walker and Rick Santorum that care about American jobs, protecting the American labor market. We don't want people coming illegally. We don't want excessive immigration that jeopardizes the working conditions for American workers. So Scott Walker and Rick Santorum, they're the ones talking about that. On the other side, you've got Rubio, who sort of moves back and forth depending on who he's talking to, but generally says, I've reformed. I know you got to have border security first. And of course, Jeb Bush says it's an act of love. He says immigrants are more fertile, and he says a lot of very interesting but kind of strange things that suggest he supports an amnesty. Yeah. And of course, he's going to have a lot of trouble in the primaries with his position.
And we'll see how it goes. Certainly, we'll be watching and seeing how those debates play out as well. Dan Stein with FAIR, thanks so much for being with us. We're learning more about the Holy Father's trip to his home continent of South America this July. Let's go to Rome for more from our correspondent, Alan Holdren. Alan, what's on the Pope's schedule?
Well, Wyatt, the Pope will be spending an entire week between 3 different Latin American countries. He's going to Ecuador, to Bolivia, and to Paraguay. He's going to a variety of different locations. He's going to be making 22 speeches. Imagine that one of those will be at a maximum security prison, another in a shanty town, and he'll also be visiting a pediatric hospital for children, poor children who suffer from cancer. So in all of these occasions, he's going to be speaking in his native Spanish. We're going to see a lot of opportunities from the Pope to go off the cuff and really give us some surprises.
It's certainly a trip that we're going to be following closely. This weekend, the Pope will also meet with Cuba's President Raul Castro in the Vatican. Do you know any more details about that meeting?
Yeah, well, the Pope will be meeting with the communist leader of Cuba there in the Vatican. It's a private meeting, so we won't know anything about it in real time. But this comes ahead of the Pope's visit to Cuba, ahead of his trip to the United States in September. So we're going to be very interested to see what they have to talk about. Surely that'll be on the list of things that they will be speaking about, and we'll know more about that on Monday.
All right, our Alan Holdren reporting in Rome. Alan, thanks so much.
Thank you.
The Holy Father is calling on the church to seek unity and to avoid division. The church should not be a place where people are always clashing and forming alliances to win their argument, Francis says. At Mass today, the Holy Father said the Holy Spirit moves things forward within the church and creates unity between all of its members. Coming up, we talk with the Bishop of Dallas, Texas about his call for prayer after Sunday's shooting in Garland. Plus, American and Armenian leaders gather in Washington to pray for the victims of the genocide. Thank you for joining us this evening. I'm Wyatt Goolsby in for Brian Patrick. The FBI says it gave police in Garland, Texas a warning about one of the attackers just hours before he opened fire, but Garland police say they had no idea the shooters were headed to Texas. 2 men were shot and killed by a traffic officer Sunday as they opened fire outside a cartoon contest depicting the Islamic prophet Muhammad. Images of Muhammad are considered blasphemous by many Muslims. The attempted attack drew a prayerful response this week by Bishop Kevin Farrell of the Diocese of Dallas. I spoke with him earlier this week. Your Excellency, thank you for talking with us. You are calling for prayers for tolerance and understanding in our world. Why is prayer vital after events like Sunday's?
Well, prayer, I believe, is vital at every moment in our lives, and especially on an occasion such as this, when the events provoke in the human person so much passion, I would say, on all sides. If we have recourse to Almighty God, that God in some way will allow us, even from a human point of view, of cooling down, as it were, and lowering our emotional level.
Well, the shooting is stirring up debate about where you draw the line between free speech and hate speech. As Catholics, where do we draw the line, and what do we do when Jesus or the Pope is mocked?
Well, I would point out that violence is never the answer to any problem that arises. We do not like when anybody would insult our Holy Father or would insult our Lord Jesus Christ in any way. And I think that if that's what we expect, we need to show that same tolerance to people who have not heard the word of God as we have. I think free speech is essential and is a part of our life in the United States, thank God. But at the same time, there are limits to our free speech. It is not an absolute.
So with that, what can we as Catholics do to promote dialogue rather than violence, even when our faith or someone else's faith is insulted?
Well, I think it's very important that we enter into dialogue, in this case, with the Islamic, with the Muslim community, and that we have ongoing dialogue. And we as leaders within the church show the example of going out to meet our brothers and sisters who may be of a different faith tradition than we are.
That's a good point. Bishop Kevin Farrell from the Diocese of Dallas, thanks so much for talking with us.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Washington's National Cathedral holds a multi-faith service in honor of the estimated 1.5 million Armenians killed 100 years ago. Thousands joined Armenia's president, Vice President Joe Biden, members of Congress, and leaders of the Armenian Church. The prayer service is part of a series of events honoring those killed by the Ottoman Turks from 1915 to 1923. Earlier this year, Pope Francis referred to the mass killings as the first genocide of the 20th century. Joining us is Ninar Keyruz with In Defense of Christians. Its mission is to raise awareness about Christian persecution in the Middle East. So, Ninar, how is your group supporting efforts to recognize the massacre as a genocide?
Hello, Wyatt. Well, first of all, thank you for having us again on your show. What we are doing is, especially lately and recently, we've issued many statements and press releases condemning the genocide, and we're working closely with many organizations such as ANCA, the Armenian National Committee of America, supporting them in their efforts because we believe this should be world recognized as a genocide, and because this is part of our mission working on raising awareness for the Christians of the Middle East, whether through advocacy, awareness, or charities. So the Armenians and the tragedy that happened 100 years ago to them, to the Assyrians, and to the Greeks, this is all part of our mission, part of our work. So we're very supportive of them, and we're very supportive of this cause. Just today also, our president, Tawfiq Baklini, and our senior advisor met with the Catholicos, His Holiness Catholicos Aram I, who's here for the National Centennial, and they discussed all of this as Armenians are still in danger, like in cities like Aleppo in Syria.
Sure, and a number of countries have come out calling it a genocide, in particular what happened to the Armenians. Why is it so important that the United States, that the U.S. uses that term, calls it a genocide?
Well, first of all, because the United States is a leading superpower, and there are other countries that are still shy. So with the United States recognizing it as a genocide, it will impact the other countries. It will follow. But also because I would want to mention the recent attacks and threats happening to the USA, so and in the United States. So it is very important to correct the history and the past mistakes so that they don't repeat themselves today.
Sure. You know, we mentioned Pope Francis recently called the Armenian genocide the first genocide of the 20th century. You had mentioned Aleppo. Is there a connection to what's going on right now with Christians in the Middle East and what happened then?
Definitely. It's ongoing. This genocide 100 years ago killed 1.5 million Armenians, 750,000 Assyrians, and 500,000 Greeks. And today it is ongoing, specifically targeting Assyrian, Syriacs, Chaldeans in Syria and Iraq by the hands of ISIS. This is an ongoing genocide against the Christians in the Middle East, and you see definitely the relation.
Okay, very good. Well, it's a good reason to pray and to join Pope Francis in prayer for all the Christians in the Middle East. Ninar Keyruz with In Defense of Christians. Thanks so much for being with us.
Thank you, Wyatt.
Up next, a Hollywood lawsuit is stirring up debate surrounding a medical procedure the church says is immoral. And the Holy Father joins his fellow Argentines in a special celebration for Our Lady. Thank you for joining us this evening. I'm Wyatt Goolsby. It's a Hollywood dispute that's bringing to light serious ethical questions. Actress Sofia Vergara is locked in a dispute with her ex-fiancé over the fate of 2 frozen embryos. Vergara's ex, Nick Loeb, acknowledges they have created 2 lives. Now he wants to implant the embryos in a surrogate and raise the children. Loeb says in a New York Times op-ed, Catholicism influenced him more than any other religion. He was mainly raised by his Irish Catholic nanny, who would take him to Mass. Joining us is Dr. John Bruchalski, founder of the Tepeyac Family Center. It's a pro-life OBGYN healthcare practice. So, John, let's talk about this case. What kind of ethical questions are we talking about here?
Thanks, Wyatt. We are essentially talking about the dignity of the human person. What's happening is that in vitro fertilization has created a Kentucky Derby approach to infertility. And so in vitro fertilization, you make 18 embryos, and you implant 2 or 3 initially, freeze the rest, and you are left with a situation in which the mother and father have only a 7% chance of conceiving after creating all these embryos. And so what we have is this family which is being torn apart. In our center, the question we ask every single patient who wants to go on to IVF is the following. As a mom and dad, you need to answer one question before you go to IVF, and that is, are the embryos that are going to be created, are they your children or are they your property? Do you love them or do you own them? That's the question you need to go into the process of, because across the world, we need to make about 15 embryos in order to have one child be delivered. And so there's an incredible embryo wastage. There's between 400,000 to 1 million frozen embryos across, in freezers across this nation.
And obviously there's just so many that are discarded.
Absolutely.
It's interesting, John, to hear you talk about in vitro fertilization, because before coming back to the church, you yourself were involved with in vitro fertilization. You were involved with abortions. Tell us, how did you come to your change of heart?
I came to my change of heart through intercessory prayer, number one, and also through good science and listening to my patients, the suffering and the trauma suffered by my patients who I thought I was helping. And so what happens is that by listening to people like Jerome Lejeune back in the late 1980s talking about the concentration cans of frozen embryos, unused embryos, that these are not just tissue, these are children. And so when you had mothers talking about the challenges of what do you do with these spares, to the suffering of infertility, all of a sudden I came to my senses and said, you know, I can't keep doing this. Good science says this is something that we should be treating the problems of infertility rather than treating the desire of wanting to have a child.
And that's certainly been consistent with what Pope Francis has talked about and his predecessors as well. Like I said, it raises a whole host of issues, but we're glad that you were able to sort of talk a little bit about that with us. John, thanks so much for being with us. John Brokowski.
Thank you so much.
Pope Francis is talking sports again today, telling athletes cheating never pays. The Holy Father told members of the Italian Tennis Federation that they have a mission to be good role models. He encouraged them to get into the game on the tennis court, but also in life and with God. Francis is telling the tennis players to give their best to God and to others. With spring in full bloom and summer right around the corner, you're probably not thinking about skiing, but some thrill seekers are still making the trek to the slopes of New Hampshire. Catherine Zeltner has more tonight.
At Tuckerman Ravine, spring is prime time for skiers to experience the thrill of victory, or the agony of a spectacular wipeout on these legendary slopes. There's more mud than snow at the beginning of the 3-mile trek to the Glacial Bowl on the southeast face of New Hampshire's Mount Washington.
You get to the trailhead, you've got this idea in your head about what you're going to do, and you come up here and you find out if you got what it takes.
After the hike to the base, it's another hour to make the 1,000-foot climb to the top. There are no ski lifts here. Skiers and snowboarders form slow-moving lines, each person using the footsteps of the person in front like a staircase, all to experience a heart-thumping thrill. No 2 days and no 2 runs are alike.
Another really steep one like Sluice that's not a good beginner run.
Rangers warn spring brings its own dangers.
Fall up high, you can hit one of those sidewalls. Some brutal injuries have happened in there.
Many thrill pilgrims say that's part of the allure. In fact, Tuckerman is considered the birthplace of extreme skiing in the U.S.
Pretty dangerous. It makes it fun, you know. A couple people died up there. Pretty gnarly.
The challenge intimidates even experienced skiers.
I started to hyperventilate, and I was like, if I don't go now, they're going to have to helicopter me down off of this mountain. But took a deep breath and just went for it.
The average snowpack here tops more than 50 feet per year. And the trails, some of the steepest runs in the country. Why thousands will make the journey here until the snow is gone at the end of the month. Catherine Zeltner, EWTN News Nightly.
Catherine, thanks very much. Today we honor Our Lady of Luján, the patroness of Argentina, on this, her feast day. Pope Francis has, of course, a great devotion to her, as do many Argentines. Here you see him laying flowers before her statue last year. The original statue has been venerated in Argentina since 1630. Pope Pius XI declared Our Lady of Luján the patroness of Argentina in 1930. And the month of May is known for one of devotion to the Blessed Virgin Mary. So we at EWTN News Nightly want to take a moment to wish all of the mothers and grandmothers a happy Mother's Day this Sunday. For the entire EWTN News Nightly team, I'm Wyatt Goolsby. Good night and God bless.